All right, folks, back here. This is part 4 from chapter 5. So, what are we going to do when a fraudster is looking to reconcile the bank statement? So, again, normally this is a person who's ever reconciling is a person in positions to hide, the fraudulent checks. Okay, so a lot of different things. The biggest problem they're going to have is the bank balance will not reconcile. They're going to have to force that balance somehow. And again, they're probably, again, we're thinking paper here, but notice it says the bank statement may be intercepted and altered. Now a lot of things are done electronically, so I'm not sure how well that would work, but that's how it had typically been done in the past. Okay. So some other things that they do, if you take a look here, how do they go about altering checks, right? They erases, if you take a look here on check returns, employee erases his own name and re-enters the name of the proper employee. Anyway, so that you can alter the payee, you can forge the maker, the authorized maker. So it's not limited to alter payee scams. Altering checks, again, I don't know how much that's done. I think now it's more fraudulent billing and charging than it is with the checks, but they're kind of running you through. These are things they've seen in the past. And the smaller the business, the more likely this can happen. Okay. One of the other things is, in accounting, we know all about the disbursements journal, right? So, write checks payable to themselves, but list a different person as the payee. Okay. Now, the thing about that is, if somebody ever goes through and takes a look at these checks, now most companies don't get their checks back anymore. They used to. Okay. They can enter false amounts. Okay. The other thing, they'll try to code fraudulent checks to accounts that are rarely reviewed or very active. So if they're very active, they're hoping to just hide it in the mess. And if they're rarely reviewed, people aren't paying that much attention to them. Okay. So notice here, this method can be very effective in concealing fraudulent checks when the company is not diligent. Again, we're going to go back up here. Not diligent in what? And if I can find my pen, I'll tell you. What did I do with it? Hold on. Oh, found it. So, what is it always about, folks? Come on, say it with me. Internal controls. Right? By the way, do you ever have the notice that well-designed internal controls could solve a whole host of problems? If you haven't figured that, I'm sure you've probably figured that out by now, but obviously this is where these issues come up. Reissuing intercepted checks, again, another methodology. So notice, employee purposely does not mail a check and then reissues a payment. And this way they have an extra check. They have 2 checks for 1 invoice, and then they alter the check. Other supporting documents. Now this, making fake supporting documents. This is what I have seen more often. Fake invoices, fake purchase orders, fake receiving reports. Okay. And then here, this is only practice. So the employee writes the check to somebody else, and usually that's some sort of company. It's a company that the employee has created. Okay. That I have seen much more often. Okay. Now, some of my all-time favorites here. This one I've seen a number of times. Payroll schemes. Okay. Fraudulent time cards or payroll registers. So basically, they're going to issue a payment to an employee that doesn't exist. Ghost employee, that's probably my favorite. The other one, falsified hours. I'm sure you've probably heard about people punching in for somebody else. Same thing with commissions, right? Just a real quick story. I once knew a fellow that got paid commission from selling tile, and what would happen would he'd have a friend of his in another company buy the tile, he'd get the commission, then after a certain amount of time left, the tile would be returned and he'd split the commission with the guy on the other end. So those things I've seen. So ghost employee. I don't. You may have heard of this. I don't know. Depending upon what you do, ghost employees, someone on the payroll who doesn't work for the company. All right, ghost. They just made somebody up. off as an accomplice of the fraudster. So they're usually using somebody that's real but just doesn't do any work. So they're added to the payroll. Somebody's keeping their information. Paycheck is issued to the ghost and then delivered to whoever they are. But the thing is, they're not actually working. They're just collecting additional money from the company. Okay? By the way, you've probably, I don't know, this is TV show stuff, but if you ever saw The Sopranos TV show, they were always talking about no-show jobs. Okay, now this is obviously mobster-related stuff in this case, but it's the same kind of thing. Basically, somebody's drawn a check and they didn't do any work, okay? And let's take a look at the ghost employee thing here. That'd be good for a laugh, or at least a little bit. So let's see. Okay, you put them on the payroll. And then notice here, accomplice, friend, relative, other. Anyway, you can kind of go through here and see what happens. Forge approval, right? Delivery of paycheck. Accomplice's residence. I mean, you know, like I said, by the way, you know, I have to tell you, if you thought about being fraudster, this book would probably do a pretty good job telling you how to do it, or at least get you started. All right, so notice here some things here they tell you about the ghost employees. You add them to the payroll. You got to have somebody that has the authority. You have to get in the payroll accounting. Another thing is not removing names of terminated employees, and then you have somebody, you know, obviously they're not happy with the company, so they might be happy to help you cheat them. Again, you have to create fake time card or some other activity. Notice the delivered to accomplice to prevent prevent suspicion. Well, that's because otherwise what's going to happen is you won't be able to to get the money. So what they do is they send it over to the accomplice and then they split it up later on. Okay. So let's see, how do you think we prevent it? Well, we could probably cover it with one good thing, but here you go. Take a look. How about this? Here we go. Internal control. Internal control. Internal control. Internal control. Internal control. Internal control. It's always the same with all of these. So fraud exists between the opportunity, like we looked at before. Rational, whether the fraud triangle with the opportunity. The opportunity presents itself. Some people, they will do it. Falsifying hours. By the way, this is, like they said here, most common. I've seen this done a number of times. Just put more hours in than's appropriate. They could get somebody's signature. You could have collusion with a supervisor. Maybe they have extra payroll. Instead of just giving it back to the company, they split it with you. Poor customers. Clocking somebody else in, I'm sure. I think if you've worked in retail, or some hourly payment, I'm sure. If you have worked in retail or some sort of hourly situation, you've probably seen that happen. Okay? And did anybody stop it or not stop it? Okay? Here's a little bit about falsifying hours. Let's take a look. Employee falsifies timekeeping record. Okay, well, that's a good start. Yeah, overstate the hours or change the pay. I think increased rate of pay, that's harder to do because you have to get approvals. Okay, but over here, changing the number of hours, that's a little bit easier to do. This one, normally you got to get somebody's approval for this. Normally this requires more approval. Okay, this guy right here. So that's a little bit harder to do. Okay. All right, let's take a look. Gonna put this back down again. All right. So let's take a look. Now we're going to talk about, well, how do you prevent this stuff? Preventing and detecting. Okay, here we go. So just think, when you're taking this test, all you got to do is think about internal controls, and you should be in good shape. Authorization, verification, restrict access, present when time cards are punched. Now this one's, no, I don't know this. So you're telling me the supervisor is going to stand by the time cards? I don't honestly think that's going to happen. But anyway, maintain copies of it. Test for overtime abuse, comparisons. Again, any type of report, any kind of analysis, exception report. By the way, you might see who is the individual that's always on overtime. All right, folks, that's part 4. I think we got either 1 or 2 more parts and we'll be ready to go for chapter 5. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.